Welcome to the Westboro Public Library. Today we are featuring Jenny Lobb with the OSU University Extension Office for Franklin County, and she is presenting Coffee Time, Exploring a Favorite Beverage. Now, we do recommend in Zoom that you go ahead and keep your camera off since this is being recorded. And if you look on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you might have to wiggle your mouse a little bit. There is a chat feature. Please feel free to enter any questions, comments, or share any resources that you may want in that chat feature. Everybody who was signed up for this will receive after this a link to the video and a transcript of the chat. So again, welcome. We do again ask that everybody go ahead and keep muted, and I will hand it over to Jenny. Jenny, hello and welcome.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for joining me this evening. So the topic of the evening is coffee time, exploring a favorite beverage. And this presentation was actually developed by an extension specialist in North Dakota, but she was gracious enough to share her presentation. So I am presenting it this evening. I am also a registered dietitian, just like the author of this presentation. So I will do my best to answer any questions that come up outside of the content that you see here tonight. And it will be a little bit interactive. So as you're comfortable, I will invite you to participate in the chat when I share questions and so forth. And I'm also going to go ahead and put a link to an article in the chat that was written by the author of this presentation. So if you want to follow along with that or pull it up for future reference, it mirrors the content that's in the presentation, you are welcome to do that. But we are going to go ahead and get started. And if you would like, as we're getting started, you're welcome to share in the chat box how much coffee you drink a day, or some of the reasons that you enjoy coffee if you are a coffee drinker, because people drink coffee for a variety of reasons. Maybe it is a habit or a lifestyle. You enjoy the caffeine in the morning, or maybe you enjoy the taste or the aroma. It might be a social beverage of sorts, lots of different reasons why people drink coffee. And it might actually be the third most consumed beverage in the world, after water and tea. And I can pretty confidently say that it might be the third because the original presentation actually said that it was the second most consumed beverage in the world. But as far as I can find when I tried to look up statistics, tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world behind water. But on average, coffee is consumed more frequently than tea in most North American, Central, and South American countries, and in some European and Middle Eastern countries, while tea tends to be more popular than coffee in most Asian countries and in Australia. And so, as I said, this will be a little bit interactive, just trying to make it fun tonight. You can sit back and enjoy your favorite beverage, whether that be coffee or something else, if it's too late in the day for your coffee. But I have a little quiz question for you. So an estimated 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed each day worldwide. Per capita, what do you think are the top coffee consuming countries in the world? I'll give you a hint, it's not the United States. So what do you think are the most the top coffee consuming countries in the world? If you want to share some guesses in chat, you can go ahead. See Brazil and Saudi Arabia. Those are good guesses. Italy. Not yet. I don't see the answer yet. So the answer is actually the Netherlands, Finland, and Canada, according to the statistics, I think, from 2018. So tonight we'll talk briefly about the origins of coffee, some of the health benefits of coffee, and then how the different brewing methods can alter the nutritional content. Starting with the origin. So as legends have it, coffee originated in Ethiopia when a goat herder noticed that when his goats consumed a certain type of berry, they were awake and restless all night. But that sounds like a pretty miserable experience for the goat herder, but he made the most of it and shared the news with a local monastery where the inhabitants used those berries to stay awake and alert throughout evening prayer. So that's the legend of coffee's origin. From there, the word about coffee spread east to the Arabian Peninsula and then eventually to Europe and the US. And as the popularity of coffee grew, so did coffee houses. And now you can find a modern day coffee house most anywhere in the United States and in other countries as well. And different countries and cultures have different coffee traditions. So coffee houses are often a place for people to gather and enjoy their coffee, drink coffee, of course, but also maybe listen to music or play games or have conversation with one another. And so there's a lot of tradition associated with the coffee house or coffee drinking. For example, in many Scandinavian countries, people often take a break from their day. It's called fika, to enjoy a cup of coffee, usually along with sweet treats like pastries or fruit and friends. So instead of stopping by the coffee shop and taking a cup to go in the morning, like we often do here in the United States, grabbing something on the go while we're commuting on our way to work or wherever we may be. In many Scandinavian countries, people actually stop what they're doing to take a coffee break, to stop and enjoy the beverage and enjoy that time with friends, or sometimes even to conduct business. And there are different cultural coffee traditions. If you have some that you would like to share, feel free to do that. The last time I presented, I had someone share that she was actually able to be part of a coffee ceremony during a visit to Ethiopia one year, which was very, and then she sent me some pictures afterwards, which was really neat to see. Okay, so here's another quiz question for you. I was careful not to mention this in that legend I shared. Where do coffee beans grow? On a tree, underground, or in a bush? If you want to take a guess, you can go ahead. I see bush, and that is the correct answer. So there's a picture here of the coffee bean bush. So coffee has a lot of health benefits, which is good news. We often see conflicting headlines and it can be hard to figure out what's true and separate the fact from fiction. But if we look at research as a whole, research suggests that moderate coffee consumption, defined as 3 to 5 cups per day, and a cup is defined as a liquid cup, like you would use in your baking or measuring, so 8 ounces. So moderate coffee consumption of 3 to 5 8-ounce cups per day has some health benefits, including decreased overall mortality, improved cognitive function, and decreased risk of depression. And in addition to that, moderate coffee consumption may also play a role in decreasing one's risk of developing certain types of cancers, type 2 diabetes and heart disease, and it can help with weight loss. Coffee consumption has also been linked to reduced risk of gallstones, cirrhosis, and I mentioned, coffee consumption has benefits for cardiovascular health, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Even though coffee itself contains some lipid-raising agents, so there are some compounds in coffee that would have an effect on your blood cholesterol. They're lipid-raising agents, so your blood lipids like cholesterol and triglyceride. But when we use paper filters, the coffee filters remove those agents. So there's a minimal effect on your blood lipids, your cholesterol, your triglycerides. And there's really a minimal effect on blood pressure as well. So, you may experience a short-term increase in blood pressure after consuming a cup of coffee, especially if you're maybe a little bit more sensitive to coffee's effects or the effects of caffeine. But research suggests that there's no long-term increase or effect on your blood pressure. Research does suggest that coffee consumption and metabolic syndrome, which is, if you're not familiar with that term, metabolic syndrome is a term for a combination of conditions that includes obesity, cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar. Research suggests that the compounds that are contained in coffee have been shown to improve your blood sugar. So it can help with diabetes control and also decrease the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and other heart-related conditions. So there's another positive impact there. When we look at osteoporosis risk, so although caffeine has been shown to decrease calcium absorption slightly, the amount that's lost is minimal. So again, your moderate caffeine consumption, your coffee consumption of no more than 3 to 5 cups a day should not harm your bones. There's no significant bone loss there. And if you are especially concerned about that, adding 1 to 2 tablespoons of milk to your coffee may offset that risk, as well as just consuming a well-rounded diet that has other sources of calcium. And then finally, the caffeine in coffee. So this is specific to caffeinated coffee. The caffeine that's in coffee has been shown to reduce or delay the development of Parkinson's disease. So a lot of information there. The general takeaway is that coffee consumption in moderation has been shown to either have no effect on some of these health risks or even some positive impacts associated with mitigating the risk of things like diabetes or heart disease. There are some potential negative effects of coffee, mostly associated with the overconsumption of caffeinated coffee. So maybe you've experienced some of these yourself. The overconsumption of caffeine may result in headache, nausea, anxiety, restlessness. Some individuals with anxiety find that coffee can exacerbate their symptoms. So if you're sensitive to coffee and the caffeine and these negative effects, maybe reducing your intake or choosing to drink half caffeinated or decaffeinated coffee could be something to consider. But everyone's tolerance to caffeine depends on individual factors like your body size, your weight, your age, and just how sensitive you are. So I know that I tend to be more sensitive to caffeine. So I usually just have, 1 to 2 cups in the morning. And then that's it for the day. If I'm drinking caffeine later into the day, then I definitely experience that restlessness. And I'm also more sensitive to the withdrawal symptoms. So if I have more than my 1 to 2 cups a day, I experience, maybe headache or restlessness. If I don't have those 1 to 2 cups, I also experience the headache and maybe other withdrawal symptoms like irritability or lethargy. So everyone's tolerance and sensitivity level and so forth is very individualized, but those are some of the potential negative impacts. And some people aren't very sensitive at all. Some people can drink caffeine or coffee all day long and still get a good night's rest. So you just have to know yourself and know what works and what doesn't. But in general, if you want to reap those positive impacts and combat or minimize those negative effects, then the key points to remember are to drink coffee in moderation. Again, no more than those 3 to 5 cups a day. A cup being, the standard size coffee cup, the 8-ounce cup. Oftentimes we go to those fast food restaurants, or you get a to-go coffee from somewhere, and it may be 2 or 3 cups in that 1 cup. So that can be deceptive. You also want to consume an overall diet rich in calcium to prevent osteoporosis. And then, as we'll talk about different brewing methods, if you are someone who has been told you have high cholesterol or maybe at higher risk of heart disease, make it a habit to drink filtered coffee to avoid those lipid raising agents that are naturally occurring in coffee. I see the question, how do coffee companies add caffeine to their product when it boasts extra caffeine? We'll talk in just a minute about coffee beans and which roasts have more caffeine than others. But you can extract compounds from food and beverages. So, you just like, we might fortify a cereal, for example, with extra B vitamins. You could extract caffeine and add that to a product, coffee or any other beverage, to add that extra caffeine. There's ways that food sciences can extract and add and manipulate their products and market them in certain ways. A good question there. All right, so looking a little bit about different varieties of coffee beans. Beans are typically categorized as either Arabica or Robusta, and most of the higher quality or specialty coffees are the Arabica, and maybe you've never noticed that before. I have a couple of bags here, and of course they're hard to see, but here's one example, and this right on the front of the bag. On the bottom it says 100% Arabica, and that is an indication that it's a higher quality bean. It's more expensive to produce. It has a little bit more subtle flavor, whereas the Robusta beans, which are often used to create the big cans that are sold at like a big box store, they're more bitter, they're higher in caffeine, but they're less expensive to produce. So oftentimes the big canisters that are sold at a low cost are either Robusta or a blend of those two types of beans. They're less expensive, but it's a little bit more rough and bitter than the Arabica beans. And then our beans are roasted to various degrees. Roasting coffee beans brings them to a very high temperature, resulting in increased aroma and flavor. So the darker the roast, the richer the flavor, and that could be good or bad, just depending on your preferences. Some people prefer light roast, some prefer darker roast. I saw, at the beginning when I was asking you to share as you were comfortable your favorite roast. I saw at least one person said the blonde roast or the morning blend, which is much lighter. And some people prefer that lighter flavor, whereas some prefer the dark flavor. It's not that either is right or wrong, it's just personal preference. So another quiz question, if you want to answer in the chat, you're welcome. Which roast contains the most caffeine? I see one guess for dark. It is actually light. Yeah, so light roast has more caffeine because it's a shorter roasting time. The longer that a bean is roasted, the more caffeine it loses. And I often, when I'm teaching, cooking, I say a vegetable is still a vegetable, even if there's a little bit of nutrient loss in the cooking process. And the same is true here. Coffee is still coffee, even if a little bit of caffeine is lost in that roasting. But a light roast does have more caffeine relative to the dark roast because some is lost during that roasting. So lighter is a lighter body, a little bit lighter flavor, but they are more acidic and they do have more caffeine. And there are some examples of some common, perhaps light roast listed here. And blonde, of course, is another popular one. And then moving along the spectrum, we have our medium roast, which are often titled things like your American or city or breakfast roast. Then we have medium dark, which are a little bit darker, crossing into that other end of the spectrum. And then our dark roast are the ones like your French and Italian roasts that are bold in flavor. Some people do not like dark roast because they say it has a more bitter or smoky flavor. And I'm not a fan of like French roast, for example. From, if you're thinking about Starbucks coffee, French or Italian are just too dark for me. I tend to prefer more medium. My partner prefers light roast, so we usually at home will buy, this is a medium. Port side blend is one of my favorites, but it's just all personal preference. We're going to talk a little bit more about instant coffee in just a minute. The other roast I'll mention is espresso. So espresso is coffee that's made by forcing near boiling water under high pressure through finely ground coffee beans that are actually packed into cakes. So if you've been to a coffee bar, you've seen the espresso machine on the bar. Maybe you even have an espresso machine at home. It takes about 30 seconds to draw a cup or a shot, as they're called, of espresso. And they contain highly concentrated coffee. So it's about 63 milligrams of caffeine per ounce. And espresso can be consumed just by itself. It's also commonly used to make more coffee drinks like cappuccinos and mochas and lattes and so forth. So if we look at the caffeine content of a cup of coffee and then some of those espresso drinks, you'll see this is Starbucks, and this was pulled directly from their website. They have their nutrition information posted, and just about any chain that's a large chain would have their nutrition information posted. It would probably be fairly similar. You'll see that the caffeine content of a 16-ounce cup of coffee, which is 2 8-ounce cups, is about 310, whereas your medium size, the 16-ounce espresso drinks are half that. So your espresso shot is highly concentrated, and then there's usually milk, sometimes water, depending on the drink added to it to make an espresso beverage. And so usually an 8-ounce cup of coffee would have, maybe 1 to 200 milligrams of caffeine, depending on how strong you're brewing it at home. The other thing you'll notice here is that, your coffee and your espresso itself have, very few calories, no sugar. What happens when you're making an espresso drink is that starts to climb. For your cappuccino and your latte, the calories and sugar are those that are naturally occurring in the milk, because those drinks are made with the espresso and steamed milk. When you start to add flavorings and syrups and whipped cream, looking down the chart at some of those fancier drinks, the caramel macchiato or the mocha, you're having 30-40 grams of sugar in a cup, which is probably as much, if not more, as a candy bar. So thinking about nutrition, there's something to be said about the health benefits of the coffee itself. You have to be careful about what's added to it, and know that those specialty drinks that have the flavors and so forth are okay every once in a while. It's not something you want to drink on a daily basis, because that's a lot of sugar that you're consuming with your morning coffee. And I've had people ask before, like, what if you really enjoy the flavor, the vanilla or the caramel? One thing you might consider is looking for flavored beans, or adding something like cinnamon to your coffee to get a little bit of the flavor or the sweetness without all the extra sugar that comes in those drinks. Likewise, if you're making your own coffee at home, this chart just shows how some of those additives may impact the nutrition profile. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink of water here. So you just want to be careful about how those add up, and just know, again, your coffee itself has some great health benefits. When you're starting to have, a lot of cream or a lot of sugar and a little bit of coffee, then the health benefits may not be quite so powerful. All right, what's really interesting to me is how sometimes the brewing method can impact the nutrition profile of our cup of coffee. So there's a lot going on this slide. Basically, it compares we're comparing 3 different things: the caffeine content, the antioxidant content, and the heart health benefits of a cup of coffee based on brewing method. And again, remind you that the coffee is still coffee. There's a lot of stuff there: caffeine, antioxidants, but they do differ slightly depending on how you're preparing it. So starting with the caffeine, your standard drip brew, your standard coffee maker, with your filter that you're running the hot water through, typically has the most caffeine compared to other methods. If you're brewing a full pot, mostly because of the time that the hot water is running over the coffee grinds, and having the opportunity to extract the caffeine. Your French press is second. With your French press, your coffee grinds are sitting in hot water for 2 to 5 minutes, 2 to 4 minutes. So it still has a significant amount of time for the caffeine to be extracted. Whoops, go back there. And then your single serve pod, like the Keurig, would be next on the line. The hot water is running over. What we see that's different about cold brew and instant coffee is that cold brew is, there's no hot water there, it's cold brew. So the coffee is actually sitting in cold water, not as much caffeine is extracted in that brewing method. And then instant coffee is actually pre-brewed and then dehydrated. So there's some caffeine that's lost in that process. And so there are instant coffees. Instant coffees kind of have this bad connotation to them. And some of them, have been around a while and probably don't taste great. There are some newer instant coffees. They've come a long way. And so if you're wanting to enjoy a cup of coffee and maybe want to try to minimize the caffeine a little bit, instant coffee might be something to consider. Instant coffee also, interestingly, has more antioxidants than some of the other methods, due to the fact that antioxidants are concentrated during that processing in the way instant coffee is made. Remember though that this is just, brewing method is just one factor. So your roast is another factor. So here in this chart, you would be comparing brewing method that's all of the same roast. So lighter roast have more caffeine and antioxidants than your darker roast. So if that is constant, then your brewing method is going to impact the nutrition profile a little bit as well. So antioxidant content, your French press has more than your standard drip in this instance. And then your single serve pod, the Keurig, has a little bit less than your standard drip, and then cold brew is at the bottom here. And then heart health benefits. This is based on the, as I mentioned earlier, your coffee has compounds, naturally occurring compounds that can raise our cholesterol, but using a coffee filter, a paper filter, filters those agents out. So, so your instant coffee, again, those agents are lost, those compounds are lost in the process, so no worries about the lipid raising agents with instant coffee. And then with your standard drip, you're filtering through a paper filter, so you don't have to worry about those there. Same with the Keurig. The Keurig has its own filter. French press does not. So French press, your grounds are just sitting in the water. There's no filter there. So you're going to get some of those agents in your cup. And then same with cold brew. The cold brew is just sitting in the water. So if you're particularly concerned about one aspect or another, you want to think about the roast perhaps, but also the brewing method, and maybe one is more appropriate for you and your needs than another. So in conclusion here, you want to consume coffee in moderation to obtain optimal health benefits. As we mentioned, there are a lot of potential benefits of your coffee consumption, as long as you're limiting it to those 3 to 5 8-ounce cups a day. Think about the coffee brewing method that is best suited for you. And then think about the ingredients that you're adding to your coffee. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot of great information from the National Coffee Association on all things coffee. You can check out their website, ncausa.org. And I'm happy to, if you have questions now, I'm happy to try to answer those as well. Before you leave, though, I do want to mention an upcoming opportunity from OSU Extension. We have an email wellness challenge coming up called Play Your Way Through the Holidays. It's totally free. If you sign up at that link, go.osu.edu /LHLW Franklin, you'll get 2 emails a week starting next week. And they will contain different tips and ideas to stay healthy through the holidays. And the theme is Play Your Way Through the Holidays. So that's another opportunity to stay connected if you're interested in that. I see, what's the weirdest coffee drink you've ever had? I don't know. That's an interesting question. So full disclosure, I worked, when I was in college, I worked at Starbucks as a barista. And being a dietitian, I thought it was, so I had, I'll just share this story. I had a family come in one time and the parent said to her child, she said, "We're not ordering any pastries today. You can order whatever drink you want." And so this child orders the largest size of a white chocolate mocha, which I'm sure had way more sugar than the cookie he had his eye on in the pastry case. So to me, I guess the weirdest drink, if I stretch it in that sense, is adding all this sugar to something that tastes good anyway. I enjoy the taste of the espresso itself without all the extra flavorings. And I love my local coffee shops. So I was in Savannah, Georgia recently and checked out Savannah Coffee Roasters. And I live in Hilliard. I love Coffee Connections of Hilliard. You know, in Westerville, you have Java Central right there. So I love just checking out the local roasters without anything added to it, just the espresso. That's my personal preference. See, how has the level of coffee consumption and the supply of it been affected by the pandemic? I'm not sure. You know, we've heard a lot about how alcohol consumption has gone up. I haven't really heard anything in the news about coffee consumption. So that's an interesting question. Is there a word for mixing tea and coffee? Not that I know of. The only thing I can think of is if you've ever heard of a dirty chai, that typically refers to chai tea latte with espresso shots in it. But other than that, I'm not sure of special terms for mixing tea and coffee.
All right, I do want to, this is Jessica. I just want to throw my hat out there too, everybody. You can also feel free at this time to unmute if you have a question. Jenny, thank you. This is great. Oh, more questions. I'll leave you to those.
Do any groups or countries discourage coffee consumption besides the Mormons? I don't know about that either. I think, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, in some cultures, tea is much more popular and much more culturally, you know, accepted than the coffee consumption. But I don't know of many cultures, you know, other than the Mormons and some religious, you know, religious sects like that, that actually discourage coffee consumption.
I have a question. So you hear a lot of ways of people using the grounds, like after you use coffee. Could you name a few of those?
Yeah, I think one of the most common is using them in your garden. There are some good nutrients for soil that are in those coffee grounds. So rather than, you know, just throwing them in the trash, you could compost them, save them for your garden. You can also use them if you have old medicines in your cabinet, maybe a prescription that you didn't finish. You know, you can dissolve your medicine in your coffee grounds to dispose of those, or, you know, look for a community prescription drop off, certainly. But those are the two that are top of mind for me. Composting, using them in your garden, is probably the most common. Do you have others that I didn't mention, Jessica?
No, that's pretty much it. I think, and please, folks, don't try this at home. I know either coffee or tea can be used to clean carpets, and I would make sure which one that is before you try it.
I see a question about medicinal uses of coffee. I, to be totally honest, cannot, you know, answer that. I talk nutrition, but not, you know, not medical treatment. And do all instant coffees taste the same? No, I think just like your coffee that you buy ground or even whole bean are gonna have different quality, different flavor. Your instant coffees are the same way. You know, there are some companies now that are making instant coffee. For example, back when I was working at Starbucks in college, Starbucks started selling instant coffee, and I'm not sure that whether they still do, but there are, instant coffee's come a long way. So, you know, it gets kind of a bad rap, but maybe it's something worth looking into for travel, especially, or circumstances like that. The process for making it has been improved over the years. And I do not know about enemas and cleanses. I try not to get into that type of medicine, I should say. So those would be questions to ask a doctor or a healthcare professional who does work in, I don't know why I can't find the words, in the non-traditional medicine.
All right, everyone, still last call. Once we have some radio silence, please, again, feel free to put anything in chat. If you would also like to share resources. Also, since we are sharing this chat with all attendees, if you would like to put your favorite coffee house or, you know, brand of coffee in there in the chat to share with everybody, I know I, for one, would like some ideas, essentially, about what's around town. But Jenny, thank you very much. This is, as a coffee lover, I was very excited for this one, especially come cold weather.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
All right, once again, everybody, this will be available on the library webpage, on this, let me rephrase that, on the YouTube library webpage. Feel free to share this with any coffee lovers that you may know. And Jenny, are you available to the public to ask questions about this after the fact?
Absolutely, yeah, I will put my email in the chat, so it'll be there in the recording, and you can certainly reach out if you have questions after tonight.
Well, thank you so much, and everybody, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to stop recording.